and so he's normally reading our scripture verse. But I'm assuming we know the story. Have you heard the story before? Jesus kind of comes in, people are waving palm branches, it's all excitement. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so the past few Sundays, we've been doing a sermon preaching series on deconstructing our faith and reconstructing our faith. And today we're doing something different, but not so different. It's gonna be a continuation of that, but in a different direction. Well, you'll kind of see it coming eventually. But as we all know, today's Palm Sunday, and traditionally on Palm Sunday, that sermon reflects this special day that happened with that triumphal entry that we didn't tell you about today. And it also looks ahead at the Passion Week leading up to Easter. That's the traditional way of doing Palm Sunday. But when is the last time I've done anything traditional in this church? I mean, how many different ways can you preach on Palm Sunday? After 20, 30, 40 Palm Sunday sermons, they all start to sound the same, right? So today we're going to look at Palm Sunday from a different perspective. Still firmly rooted on Palm Sunday, we're simply going to turn ourselves around and look in the opposite direction. Instead of looking forward to Easter, we're going to look back over the ministry of Jesus. How did we get here? How did we get to Palm Sunday? So to answer that question, we need to reflect on the ministry of Jesus. Now, scholars debate the length of the ministry of Jesus. Traditionally, it's somewhere between 1 and 3 years. The 1-year view comes from the 3 synoptic gospels, who mention only one Passover, suggesting that it was just a year. But other scholars also say it was far less than a year. Think of how quickly and condensed everything was and how quickly things were going. It was months and then it was over. Now, the 3-year view comes from the Gospel of John, who mentions 3 Passovers. So they do the math and they do 3 years. Commonly, you might hear people say that the ministry of Jesus lasted 2 years. In reality, the biblical evidence either says it was 1 year or 3 year. The 2-year view is simply the, compromise of those 2 views and say, okay, it was about 2 years. So for the sake of this sermon, we're going to use the compromised timeline of 2 years. Think of everything Jesus was able to do in just 2 years. And if it was a condensed timeline, if it was 1 year, if it was less than 1 year, it makes it even more amazing. But let's just stick with 2 years. Think of everything Jesus did in 2 years. Beginning with the baptism of John the Baptist, the temptation in the wilderness, the calling of his first disciples, the first miracle at Cana where he turned the water into wine, the Sermon on the Mount, the various healings he did, the feeding of the 5,000, and that wasn't enough, so he had to show off and do another feeding of the 4,000. Walked on water, the transfiguration, teaching in his many parables, the raising of Lazarus. These are just a quick highlight reel of everything that Jesus did. I mean, throughout your life, learning about Jesus, think of everything you know about the ministry of Jesus. Everything you know about Jesus happened in just 2 years. Now, what got me thinking about everything Jesus accomplished in 2 years is the fact that 2 years ago, on Palm Sunday, I preached my first sermon as your minister at this church. Now, I've never been one to compare myself to other ministers. I never really care how I stack up to any other ministers. I think we already can agree that I'm just different than other ministers, so why even try to compare? But I do often compare myself to Jesus. Not only because I may or may not have a Messiah complex, that's a whole other conversation, but more so because we are called to be imitators of Christ. Now, when ministers are called to a new church, there's a common advice almost every minister, I think every minister, has heard this advice. It's the most common piece of advice that ministers are told when they are called to a new church. The advice is this: your first year as minister in a new church, do not change anything in that first year. Oh, you can already see where this is going? Sit back, observe the congregation, build their trust. Then after a year of not making any changes, when you begin your second year, then you can slowly start to begin to implement a change here and a change there, and then slowly start that progress. But whatever you do, do not make any changes the first year of your ministry. So how'd I do? Okay. We're getting to that. In every church I've ever pastored, I began to make monumental changes virtually immediately. Kirsten can tell you that because Kirsten was more nervous than anyone. She's like, please, just don't do this. Please, I just want to go to lunch. And every church I ever pastored has grown by leaps and bounds. Meanwhile, every single week, as many as 100 churches shut down and close their doors forever. A likely reason contributing to these churches shutting down and closing their doors forever is because their pastor did not make any changes in his first year or her first year of their ministry. Think about it. If you wait a year to make changes, then you've set the norm for your ministry. The norm is keeping things as they are. If you make bold changes your first year, then transformation and growth become the new norm. In every church that I have ever pastored, I have been accused by many of moving too quickly. I know, shocker. My favorite, though, I do have a favorite. My favorite complaint of moving too quickly came from the last church I pastored. It was my first day on the job. Not only was it my first day on the job, it was before lunch on my first day on the job. I was literally unpacking boxes in my office before lunch on my first day of my job, and the office manager peeks her head in my office. She has a huge grin on her face, and she proudly tells me she just got off a long phone conversation with an angry church member who was complaining that the new pastor was moving too fast. I had not met this woman yet. I had not even preached my first sermon because this was the week before my Sunday. I hadn't even done anything. I just unpacked my boxes. I kid you not, it is true. Before lunch, my first day on the job, still moving into my office, an angry church member complained that I was moving too fast. How can this be possible? Well, you do know me. I had to do something. So, the website for this church had not been updated in years. There was literally stuff on that website dating back years. By the way, that was the same true when I came to this church. So, before I unpacked my boxes, I thought, well, let's just get on there and take care of this. So I updated the website and made it updated. It even had the old staff on it. It didn't have new staff on it. Even my office manager who came over, she wasn't the one who was on there, it was someone else. So I overhauled the website. And then this church didn't have a Facebook page, so while I was at it, I had to give them a Facebook page too. Then I started unpacking my boxes. It was these two things that caused a church member to get upset that the new pastor was moving too fast. Little did she know that in my first year, I was going to blow up their very traditional worship service. When I say very traditional worship service, choir in robes, pipe organ, only traditional hymns, a bulletin this long with all the responsive readings, traditional. In my first year, I ripped out their prized pipe organ and I sold it to a church in Georgia. My first year, I used the money to buy projectors, which they didn't have, screens, which they didn't have, a sound booth, which they didn't have. Less than a year, they went from ultra-traditional to what you are experiencing here every Sunday. Not only that, we stopped using bulletins altogether. Pieces of paper that you love to hold during worship. Imagine that, no bulletins on Sunday morning. That's something I haven't even done here. I did all this in my first year, and on my first day, they're upset simply because I updated the website to current information. Little did she know what moving too fast really means. Now, despite my notorious reputation for moving too fast, it still pales in comparison to what Jesus managed to do in 2 years. He literally changed the world. I haven't done that yet. Still working on it. Think of all the changes that we have made here in this church over the past 2 years. It doesn't even come close to what Jesus accomplished. I've been pastoring churches since I was in my 20s. I've been at this a long time. And I know that every single church that I ever pastored, not only were they upset that I was moving too fast on the first day, after 2 years at the church, people were still angry that I'm moving too fast. That's the part that always amazed me. After 2 years, 2 years, and people believe that change is happening too fast. How many years should it take to make change happen? The church is the only institution on the planet that measures change in years, in decades, in centuries. When I came to this church, the notorious, you are holding on to your old pews and windows. For 18 years, you were holding on to the pews and windows. 18 years. How many more years were you going to hold on to these dusty old artifacts? After 18 years, this church finally finished installing the sound system that was originally installed 18 years ago. It wasn't fully installed. You know the big, huge white speakers on the bottom? Just part of all the things that we did. Those weren't even hooked up to anything. After 18 years. There's still work to be done on the sound system yet. Only a church measures change in years and decades. And it's so ironic because who is our role model? Jesus. And Jesus taught us that the time for change is now. Jesus mentored his disciples to act quickly and decisively. Here's an example. Jesus fed the 5,000. We all know that story, the feeding of the multitudes, feeding of the 5,000. That same night is when he walked on water. He got to the other side of the lake, and he confronted religious leaders, and they had one of their confrontations. He healed a Syrophoenician woman. He healed the deaf and the mute. And then, thought, well, I'm over here. He fed another 4,000 people in another feeding of the multitudes. And these events I just said are not measured in years. This was a weekend. So now let's turn back around, still firmly rooted in Palm Sunday, and look towards Easter from the triumphal entry. Can we believe how much happened in 1 week? The crowd cheering with the palm branches waving, shouting, Hosanna. And after Jesus enters Jerusalem, everything changes. That same day is when he overturns the tables of the money changers, declaring that my house shall be a house of prayer, and you've made it a den of thieves. He wept over the city, heartbroken at what it had become. Children cried out praises in the temple, and religious leaders fumed. Another point, he curses a fig tree that bore no fruit. And every day of the week, he continued to return to the temple, and he taught, and he confronted, and he challenged. He challenged the power structure. He told stories and parables of 2 sons, parables of the wicked tenant, parables of the wedding banquet. He was questioned about taxes, questioned about the resurrection, questioned even about the greatest commandment. And with clarity and courage, he answered every trap they set for him. Then he turned the tables on them once again with his words, crying out, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees!" And while the powerful plotted, a poor widow dropped 2 coins into the treasury, and Jesus said, "She has given more than anyone." He looked ahead and warned them that the temple would fall. We've been talking about deconstruction over the past few Sundays, making room for something new to be reconstructed. It's here that Jesus is talking about the literal deconstruction of the very symbol of their institutional faith. And just when tensions reached its height, something tender happens. Just over the hill in Bethany, a woman broke open a jar of expensive perfume and anointed him. And Jesus said she was preparing him for his burial. Then it began. Judas slips away and makes a deal for 30 pieces of silver. On Thursday, they gathered for Passover, and Jesus washed the feet one by one, taking a role of the servant. He broke bread and shared a cup, saying, "This is my body and this is my blood." He spoke of love. He spoke of vines and branches and the Spirit that would come. He prayed for them. He prayed for all of us. We all might be one. Then Gethsemane, the garden of sorrow. While his disciples slept, he cried out, "Let this cup pass from me." Then the kiss, the arrest, the sword, the healing, the chains. From there, we get the trials. First, the religious court, then Pilate, then Herod. Lies, accusations, silence. And then Peter, denying him 3 times just as he said he would. Meanwhile, the crowd is roaring for Barabbas to be released. And Jesus was mocked, beaten, crowned with thorns. And then the cross. He carried through the streets. All of this, we just said, was 1 week of his ministry. 1 week. We are going to be imitators of Christ, then we need to be willing to move at the speed of Jesus. This last few weeks, we've been talking about deconstruction and reconstruction, the process that makes our faith stronger and more relevant for future generations. The same process is just as true for the institutional church itself. Any church that is seeking renewal, seeking revitalization, seeking new life, must be willing to deconstruct the very institution and traditions that they've clung to for many years. Jesus said, I will tear down this temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Jesus is talking about deconstructing the very institutional church that was at the center of their faith. Jesus then says he will reconstruct something new in its place. In my last church, we did not tear down the building, but in less than a year, I did rip out their prized pipe organ and sold it. In this church, we did not tear down this beautiful building, but in less than a year, we did sell those precious pews and windows. Any minister will tell you that even though Christians are resistant to deconstructing their faith, and that's why we had the whole sermon series, because it is difficult to reconstruct our faith in the ways we've been talking about it. Christians are far more resistant to deconstructing their church. Church members will say things like, go ahead and tell us that the very idea of the divinity of Jesus is slowly evolving in the Bible, but don't change my website too quickly. Go ahead and tell us that Jonathan and David may have been more than just friends, but don't take down the table by the front door. The last weeks, we've learned that if we want to grow a stronger faith, we must be willing to go through a process of deconstructing our faith and then reconstructing our faith. Today, Jesus is teaching us, if we want to grow a stronger church, we need to be willing to deconstruct our church and then reconstruct something more relevant for future generations. Amen. Now I'll invite Winsong to come forward.